Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Welcome to this, the first of our Educational, Youth and Culture Overview and Scrutiny Committee of 2026. A very warm welcome to you all, and of course, a Happy New Year. It's the first opportunity I've had a chance to say that. Today, just for the record, is the 14th of January. I ask that all phones are switched off, and if anybody wishes to speak during the meeting, simply raise your hand. Thank you. So we're going to move straight on. Oh.
Thank you, Chair. My is not working, so I'm going to have to use my phone with all the documents on it. Okay.
That's fine. Thank you for that, though. It's just a gripe I have. I hate phones on it. The teacher in me comes out. Sorry. So we'll start with apologies, and I understand that we have 2 apologies today. So, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've received apologies from Lisa Allen, one of our co-opted members, and also Councillor Marad Eastwood, a Cabinet member who has unfortunately got a hospital appointment this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So we'll move straight on to agenda item 2. Do we have any declarations? Sorry. Thank you for clarifying that. I don't remember receiving an email. So moving straight on to agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? No, I can't see anybody signalling. So if you now look, agenda item 3 is a new agenda item. It's urgent matters as agreed by the chair. And as it happens today, I do not have any urgent matters that I wish to discuss at this meeting. So I'm going to move straight on to the agenda item 4, the self-evaluation report, which can be found in pages 3 to 132 of your report pack. I'd like to say, before we start, a huge thank you to our Chief Officer, Claire Homard, for the compilation of this report, and indeed all the colleagues who supported her in this mammoth feat. This report shows a mature, cohesive, effective partnership across the education portfolio and a real commitment to the well-being and academic achievement of our young people. The standout comment to me is that this council has made a moral commitment to deliver in an inclusive, nurturing and worthwhile way, which enables them to successfully embrace adult life and become responsible, independent, economically active and resilient citizens. I've always counted that as my aspiration as a teacher. It's a worthwhile aspiration. It's been put into action and I wholeheartedly endorse it. Thank you. Having said that, the report does not shy away from the areas that need to, continued improvement. So without further ado, I'm going to actually hand over to Councillor Chris Jones, who's going to speak on behalf of Councillor Eastwood, who has prepared a statement for today. Thank you.
Diolch, Chair. Blwyddyn Newydd Dda. Happy New Year. So these are written by Councillor Eastwood because she really wants to get her comments noted by everybody. So I'd like to begin by thanking Claire and her teams for this excellent and comprehensive report, which covers the wide range of priorities and needs that the portfolio addresses in conjunction with and in support of our schools to ensure that all our young people, regardless of their academic ability or barriers to learning, reach their full potential. This is at the heart of the work that they do, and I see it in every aspect of the report. The report references the importance of all the roles within the education and youth portfolio and highlights, highlights how they work together and work collaboratively and cohesively with other teams within the portfolio, with other portfolios, and with partnership and community organisations. There is a real sense of the child-centred approach taking on board also the views and opinions of the child and young person, either collectively through Young Flintshire, for example, or individually in relation to their own situation. I think it is key that we continue to cascade the trauma-informed approach to fully understand the challenges that some of our learners are facing and provide appropriate support. I also wish to highlight the number of children who have been able to return to mainstream school from a home education in light of the support that they have been given, and the numbers of young people who have reached through the LEAP project, where the targets were exceeded in all areas bar one, and which has contributed to the positive NEAT figures this year. The work that the portfolio has undertaken and achieved has been externally recognised also, with awards being won by the PRU, our youth service team, and within the school modernisation team, to name but a few. And I congratulate them on this. With regard to our Welsh medium provision, I am encouraged by the number of schools achieving Cymraeg Campus Awards and the increase of pupils choosing to be educated at Ysgolion Gymraeg. I support the areas for ongoing improvement and sustainability detailed on pages 72 and 90 of the report, and agree that there has been a deliberate strategy across the education portfolio to better integrate all of its services and resources to sharpen the focus on core improvement priorities. There has been that focus on early identification and intervention where areas of concern begin to emerge in schools. Evidence of joint working can be seen in such developments as Young Flintshire, Flintshire Pride, Families First, Food and Fun, and the broadening of service offers to schools, which include Street Doctors, Little Blackbird, the Athena and Goliath projects, Forest School, and Play Pals. I also recognise that this work is being undertaken within ongoing financial challenges faced both within schools and the support services provided by the education and youth portfolio, resulting in a negative impact on budgets and the number of job roles. We are aware that there has been a significant reduction in pupil numbers in Flintshire schools, and this has led to a net reduction in funding to schools of 1,212,000. This downward trend in numbers of learners is forecast to continue. Whilst the Council has secured funding through Welsh Government's additional grant funding streams for small and rural school infant class sizes, Welsh medium, childcare, community learning and community facilities and additional learning needs, and also maximised its investment programme through seeking external funding through Sports Wales to support schools to improve their facilities. It is important for the Council to continue to invest in our school estate, not only to improve the learning environments for our learners, but to reduce the number of surplus places and ensure our limited budget is directed as much as possible to educational priorities and outcomes. The portfolio objectives given on pages 72 and 90 are based on and supported by the report, which in itself is a accumulation of the reports that have been brought to scrutiny by various officers over the year. By visiting schools and young persons' workshops, I have also seen firsthand the positive impact much of this work has had on our learners and young people, and I look forward to the continued development of our belonging strategy. Diolch.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. I actually spoke with a Cabinet member yesterday, and she very much wanted you all to hear her thoughts, and she did apologise that she could not be here today, but the reason is perfectly understandable. So I'm going to now open the floor and ask our Chief Officer Claire to begin.
Diolch yn fawr. Cadeirydd, yes, I'm pleased to be able to present to the committee this afternoon our annual self-evaluation report on the quality of education services here in Flintshire, and we look forward to having a discussion with you this afternoon and receiving your questions. And you can see I'm ably supported by virtually all of the senior management team here this afternoon. So, as you will see, the report this year is based on the new framework for the education of local government education services. So we now have two inspection areas on which to report. And you will also note that the report is prefaced by, an introduction to the context of Flintshire, bearing in mind this obviously is reaching a very wide audience. And we have a section in the report that gives you an overview of our continued work against the recommendations from the Estin report of 2019. As it's already been mentioned, the report does identify areas of what we believe to be strengths within the portfolio, but then obviously there are ongoing improvement priorities for us, which we have referenced. So I think what I would like to say, on behalf of the portfolio is, despite all the challenges that we know that we are facing, with the ongoing impacts for many of our children and young people post-COVID and the ongoing financial challenges that we face right across the sector, I still do genuinely believe that this report is demonstrating that education services in Flintshire do represent good value for money and that they are providing, strong and effective support for children and people right across the county. I don't want to spend too long going through the report, Chair, because I'm really, value the input from members. But I'm hoping that, at 105, members will have noted the actions that we have been taking against those recommendations from 2019. And you can see there that, we have been making, some good progress against some, but we still do obviously have a couple who, we are still, despite all of our best efforts, particularly around attendance and exclusion, perhaps I'm not making the progress at the speed that we would hope. But I can assure the committee it's not for lack of trying, and lots of engagement with our schools and other services that support them. I think the most important thing to recognise as well is that over the period of this report, we have obviously transitioned our education improvement services from the regional partnership now into a local authority school improvement model. And that transition, I believe, and the feedback we've had from our head teachers that has been very smooth and that they haven't seen any reduction in the quality of service, and in fact the level of service is being enhanced, and that is contributing to what we are outlining in the report in terms of, the council continues, it believes, to know its schools well. We have a lot of engagement with our schools through our supporting improvement advisors and a whole variety of officers, and that gives us quality information about our schools, which enables us as a team then to plan appropriate interventions and support our head teachers obviously to focus on that quality teaching and learning every day, which is, we know, the best way to raise pupil standards. That's reflected, I believe, in our inspection profile. The report notes particularly the particularly strong profile of inspections across Flintshire during this period, where we're saying 96% of our schools receive no follow-up at all. Where we do obviously identify concerns, and where the inspector identify concerns, they don't come as a surprise to us, and we have a range of interventions, and many members of this committee sit on our school performance monitoring group processes and knows how those systems work well, so that we can provide that essential support, but also challenge where required to enable schools to move at pace, along their improvement journey. I say our primary inspection profile is particularly strong, as referenced in the report at 106. Our secondary school profile is slightly more variable, and we recognise that, and the report obviously does note that we do have a small number of schools in follow-up categories at the moment that we are working very closely with. But I think, the positive features that are in those inspection reports, particularly identifying the spotlights of really effective practice. We're pleased to see a significant number of our schools, both in the primary and and in the secondary sector as well, being recognised for that excellent work, and then they are showcased by Estin then as good practice for schools and other local authorities to review and hopefully learn from. As I say, in 108, we do reference some progress in the attendance levels, and I'm sure this is something members will want to tease out. And as you can see there, you know, whilst we haven't returned to pre-pandemic levels, and that's not a unique situation to Flintshire, it's still very much a national issue, we are making some progress in improving the rates of attendance within our schools, which is obviously vital. If children are in school, you know, obviously they're not going to benefit from the educational offer that our schools can give them. So, you know, some progress there, but still more to do. But, you know, as we've noted, there is still a number of challenges for our children and young people in terms of their engagement and sometimes their behaviour in schools, which is impacting on the level of exclusions. And again, although the data is not quite nationally verified yet for this particular report, you know, there has been a small reduction in the number of permanent exclusions, which is very welcomed. You know, we need to keep our learners within the system. And we are seeing a reduction in the number of fixed term exclusions of over 5 days. But in the secondary sector in particular, you can see that the issue of 5 days or less exclusion is still an issue. You know, we are working very closely with our schools, as the Cabinet members' notes reference. You know, we continue to support our schools in that trauma-informed approach, you know, to support their staff to effectively de-escalate challenging situations within the classroom, so that hopefully we don't get to that point where, you know, a school feels it has no choice. And we have to recognise at the end of the day it is a head teacher's decision whether or not they feel they need to use that exclusion process. But obviously, ideally, we would not want to be getting there in the first place. I think the report as well outlines, you know, a significant amount of information about the level of services that we provide to vulnerable learners, and learners can have a vulnerability for all sorts of reasons. And I'm sure if, you know, as you've gone through the report, you've seen perhaps the strength and depth and the range of services that we offer through the portfolio to support learners with, you know, a huge variety of needs, whether that's speech and language, whether that's, you know, cognitive development, you know, whether it's particularly a particular form of an additional learning need. And again, you know, the work of the team, you know, across our schools, supporting staff in our schools is vital in that regard. But I think, again, as the report notes, what we're seeing is obviously a continuing rise in the number of children and young people presenting with complex needs that require a high degree of support. And you know, the demand for that specialist provision is currently outstripping demand. So that's something that we are strategically, you know, reviewing at the moment. So in terms of that inspection area 1, education services and their impact, you can see at 1.10 in the report the areas where we believe we need to continue our focus, and obviously that underpins council plan priorities and, you know, service priorities as well in terms of our work over the year ahead. In terms of the second area of the inspection framework, that's now focuses on leading and improving. And, you know, so this is looking at our, not just the portfolio actually, but the council as a whole in terms of its strategic commitment to education. And I believe this comes through very strongly in the report. And again, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our elected members and members of this committee in particular for their ongoing dedication and support for education services here in Flintshire, because you always put the, you know, the needs of children first, and for that we are very grateful. So I think the report very much outlines that strong corporate and political support for the education and youth portfolio, and we, as I say, are very grateful for the commitment from education committee members, you know, to our school improvement processes and to the other committees that we have that support things like our Welsh Education Strategy, for example, and other important groups and meetings. As the Cabinet member referenced in her comments, we have deliberately taken that strategy over the last couple of years within the portfolio of trying to increasingly align the work of each service within the portfolio on those common goals of improving attendance, improving engagement, trying to reduce exclusions, and obviously support our children and young people. And I believe we've made some good progress in that. I mean, yes, resources are tighter. We need to use the resources that we have more efficiently and effectively. And we are using our belonging strategy as the vehicle to do that. We have brought a report to this committee on that, and we are making good progress, and we'll update you later in the year, but we are very close to being able to issue our first major piece of documentation from that strategy, our belonging charter, which has been co-constructed, with our head teachers across Flintshire. So that work is developing at pace and will continue to be a priority. And of course, the work that we've done around Young Flintshire, recognising the importance of, the needs and the rights of children, their opportunities to participate, again, I think has been a strength of the work that we've done this year. We maintain good relationships with our head teacher body. We meet with, head teacher colleagues through the federations, through a variety of working groups. And when we have had external visitors to the authority, such as Estin, they will interview head teachers as part of thematic reviews. In terms of our own recent panel assessment here within the council, head teachers are also consulted with, and the feedback from head teachers is that they believe that our services are positive, and what they particularly welcome is the good communication and the transparency. So I think those relationships are really important, because we have those well-established networks, and I think it's certainly fair to say that it's underpinning it's really underpinning our new approach to school improvement, Vicky, isn't it, in terms of that collective approach of working with our schools. We have to recognise that we continue to invest in our school estate, and there's been significant investment in our, and that continues to be a priority for us going forward, so that our children and learners and our staff can access the best possible facilities to underpin their daily work in terms of delivering that quality teaching and learning environment. But I can't ignore the resilience of our school budgets in this report. It was a recommendation from the 2019 Aston report that in terms of the management of school deficits, and obviously the financial landscape has shifted significantly since 2019. And I believe that this report and our feedback to you in previous meetings clearly demonstrates that we do have a robust process around monitoring our schools' budgets, supporting our schools that find themselves in that difficult situation. As we've noted, this shift in pupil demography, and the challenges around levels of funding. So, I can't say anything other than that obviously the level of financial resilience across our school network at the moment is a significant cause for concern. And again, that's clearly referenced, isn't it, in our risk register. So that's something we monitor very, very carefully. You can see obviously some reference to that in 1.16 of the report. And as we've discussed in this committee, obviously the most challenging aspect of that is the impact that then has in our schools, where head teachers are having to make challenging decisions about the size and scale of their workforce, many of them having to make efficiencies in terms of posts and redundancies. Obviously, we provide the schools with as much support as we can through our services here, through our HR and finance colleagues as well. But, as you've seen in reports that we've brought to you earlier in the year, there continues to be a reduction in the workforce. Obviously, as pupil numbers decrease, you would expect there to be an element of workforce restructuring to reflect the fewer number of pupils. But as we've noted, this particularly can have an impact on some of our more vulnerable learners, because often support posts that are in schools are the ones that are at risk of being reduced. But again, despite all of that, I do genuinely believe that our education services do continue to provide that good value for money. And I can assure the committee that we are not complacent. We are always striving to improve. We recognise there's still areas of work that need to be done. But I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of my team. I've got obviously seen nearly all of our senior managers here, and all the teams that work beneath them, because I do not sit in the dark room and write this report. Every service has its own process, where they sit with their teams, they are gathering that evidence, they are pulling that together. It goes to the senior manager, who will then, contribute that, and then we go through that process of trying to bring all of that report together. So I hope, despite the fact that this report has been, developed by many, many people, there is a coherence to it, and that it's, if anybody wanted to know, well, what's education all about in Flintshire? I believe if they read this report, it would give them a really good overview of all of the services that we offer and the engagement that we have to give our children and young people the very best opportunities if they are being educated here in Flintshire. So thank you for your indulgence, Chair. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Councillor Priest, please.
Thank you, Chair. Apologise before if my voice starts to go, and that's why I came on first, because I wasn't actually going to be here. I was going to go online, but my IT equipment wasn't working. Thank you very much for this report. This huge report, I've got to say, all 131 pages of it. I stopped writing questions when I got to 162, because at that point I thought I need to concentrate now and bring it back down and focus in on what I'm looking at. There's certain sections I will go into. I found the report very enlightening, very detailed, but I didn't feel it was a self-assessment report, to be perfectly honest. It is an overview in detail of the provision for education. When I have styled and looked at self-assessment reports, you have got the overarching report from the whole of a department, etc. And then you have your peripheral departmental ones underneath. And they are written by those department heads. And they give their ragging, or the new style of ragging, which is RAYG, which I don't understand why we've now got yellow in, as well as amber, but there we go. Not quite there. You can tell there's different styles within this report, because we've got the focus of up-to-date data, and it is last year's data. And in some parts of the report, we're not even touching on that. It's up to 23-24 data. So we're going back quite a way within the actual report. Some have done very well in what they've put forward. It is very up to date and very comprehensive. And that, I've got to say that throughout. So I'm saying yes and nay. But it is almost like a little bit bitty of how it's been reported. I want to focus my questions, though, on the growing risk arising for the reducing in funding to the education budget. The paper before us describes careful financial management, the deficit recovery planning, and the migration of how it's coped within it. What they do not yet do clearly enough is confront the educational risk of prolonged underfunding. We are now facing a position where a significant proportion of Flintshire schools are forecast to be in deficit, and that is absolutely terrible. That is something that we need to really focus in, where central school improvement capability has already been reduced, and where schools are increasingly balancing budgets through staff reductions or redundancies or short-term measures. My concern is, at what point do managing a budget become managing a deficit and decline? Eston will not judge us on when we balance our books. They will judge us on whether learners' outcomes, well-being and entitlement have been protected, particularly for our most vulnerable learners, which that report part is excellent. I therefore want to understand how confident the authority truly is that the current RAYG rating reflects the real risk that we've got to standards, equality and sustainability, not just simply our ability to cope with less. And if funding was, goodness knows, reduced even further, I want to be clear, what first challenge of our capability, how are we going to be able to cope with the capability, the curriculum breadth, or support the most vulnerable? Those are the risks this committee needs to scrutinise, honestly, today. Now, I have reduced these. I apologise. I'm going to go through just a few of them, because if I can come back later, if that's okay.
Perhaps Claire would like to answer what you've put forward so far. I mean, is there anything you'd like to say at this point, Claire?
Yeah, Diolch, and colleague officers can chip in as well. Well, we all recognise that this is a significant risk, but the portfolio is not responsible, is it, for the level of funding that comes into the council? I believe what this report is demonstrating, and perhaps citing the very positive inspection profile, for example, generally, very, very positive at primary. And that actually our schools, despite all those challenges, are continuing to deliver high quality educational experiences for their children. We're not seeing that impact, are we, in terms of our inspection outcomes? I'm not saying it's easy, but that's the main measure that we have, don't we, of school effectiveness, is that external inspection process, so via Eston, and our inspection profile is very strong. I think the issue of the impact on schools, we can't deny that we have seen the reduction in aspects of the school workforce, but ultimately, again, head teachers and governing bodies are responsible for the management of their budget and the deployment of their resources. We are trying to support them as best we can with the resources that we have, making sure that all the grant funding that comes to the local authority is used according to its appropriate terms and conditions to give them the maximum funding that we can give them, obviously, to support education services. So I don't have an easy answer to that question for you, Councillor Pearce, because actually it's beyond our control. I think what we're trying to do is to demonstrate that we are trying to reuse the resources that we have as effectively as possible to support our schools and to support our schools to manage their budgets and make appropriate decisions at that school level, obviously to support their learners. Is there anybody else anybody else across the team have anything to add to that at this point? Vicky?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up really in terms of some of the questions. I think probably maybe questions you come back to, Councillor Pearce, around the content in the report and as a self-evaluation. So obviously we've followed very much the local government education services framework for Eston, and I think that's probably a useful resource perhaps for members of the committee to perhaps have a look at as well as part of the wider reading, to understand the complexity of everything that we have to put in terms of our evaluation. We don't have to do it in a particular way. We've taken the decision to frame it around the key questions. And you'll remember from previous self-evaluations that we've brought that there's been a change in terms of the framework. So we thought it was important to mirror our self-evaluation around that. There are always going to be, I think, you mentioned particularly around different reporting cycles. I think that is very much because they are based on national reporting cycles for data. So in terms of when, attendance nationally is reported, school examination results, they're all on different timescales. And actually, that's the complicated bit really in terms of trying to get that to fit into any evaluation, because a self-evaluation is a point in time, isn't it? And we're already, this is the evaluation of the previous academic year. We're already now into our next academic year. So finding that line sometimes can be difficult. And of course, we also know that we run on an academic year, and as a council, we run on a financial year. So that always makes for interesting marrying up sometimes in terms of the evaluation. But I think the core bit of a self-evaluation report, and I think what hopefully we've tried to achieve here, is do we understand our services well? Do we understand what we're trying to achieve? So what is our vision? And I think as a scrutiny committee, we're very clear on what our collective vision as a council is for the children and young people in Flintshire. And where can we identify where that is working? Yes, within the context of reducing resources at times. So what actually is going to have the biggest impact, and where can we see that, and how do we evaluate that in this sort of stopping for a moment as part of the self-evaluation to have a look at that. And then where can we see where we need to focus our resources moving forward and focus our challenges, which is where we've tried to pull out collectively across, at high level, because it has to be at this level, because there are so many complexities and layers within that. You know that as well as myself. So I think that's sort of some context really in terms of where this sits within the local government inspection framework for Eston. But it's a document that hopefully is a document for all audiences. We haven't written it for Eston. We haven't, written it for ourselves. We haven't written it for scrutiny. It is a document that is, I think, to be read by anybody who's interested in terms of, our outcomes for children and young people in Flintshire. And hopefully it's accessible to all through that lens as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vicky. Councillor Priest, please.
Thank you, Sharon, for agreeing with me that it is an overall report. It isn't specifically a self-assessment report. So if we go forward on some of the questions that I've got, we've got escalating deficit. which comes on to the other point that you were making. 34 schools forecast to be in deficit by March 26. How confident is the authority that current financial control are sufficient to prevent systematic failure? Do we do one at a time, or? Okay.
That might be easier, actually.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, and again, I might ask Vicky to step in because she helps manage this process. We have a very clear and robust process for licence, for managing school budgets, deficits, and when schools need to apply for a licence, because they do not have an automatic right to a deficit. They have to apply to the council. There is a very clear structure around that. There is an escalation process. That process starts with, obviously close monitoring of the school's budgetary position, at the school level. As I say, it is the responsibility of the head teacher and the governing body to manage that. Obviously, that will inform discussions, for example, with their school improvement advisor, because it may be shaping the work, obviously, that they are doing and decisions that they are making in terms of the curriculum, the structures, the class sizes. They will be taking support from our HR and finance teams as well. Can they make timely decisions when they're looking at workforce changes, potentially as somebody retiring? Do I need to refill that post? So that work goes on at a school level all the time. But then obviously when a school does, we can see through our monitoring and the high quality reports that we get through our finance colleagues, when we can see that a school's budgetary position is deteriorating and they are at risk of going into a deficit or have moved into that position, then we escalate them through our financial monitoring procedures. And there are detailed meetings held between the senior manager for school improvement and the finance officer with the head teacher and the chair of governors, where there are very robust discussions in order to underpin whether or not the local authority will actually support that application. And we don't always support them initially, do we, Vicky? If we do not feel that the school's actions are sufficiently robust, or we feel that they've missed opportunities potentially to make further efficiencies and avoid that deficit position. And then obviously their recovery plan, but there are further stages to that process that, if having done all of that and it's still very challenging, then actually the head teacher and chair of governors they have to meet with the chief executive, the section 151 officer, and myself as chief officer, again, where their delivery, their operational management, their plans for managing that deficit are put under significant scrutiny. So I am confident that we have that robust process. Vicky, is there anything you would like to say? Because I know there's been very clearly times when your challenge back to schools has resulted in the school either avoiding deficit or reducing that deficit. But as you manage it every day, would you like to give a little bit more flavour?
Yeah, thank you, Claire. I mean, the whole process is underpinned by the licence deficit protocol. I think that's clear. And I think, part of the work that we do is about supporting schools to understand that process as well. Because, for some schools, they may not have been in that territory before where they've had to perhaps even consider looking at a licence deficit approach. So it's quite new for some of our head teachers. And I think if they were sitting here today, they would tell you that. So, part of it is also about the support for our schools and for our governing bodies. Because, in terms of local management of schools, the governing body are the decision makers in terms of what strategies the school can adopt to try and avoid becoming into the licence deficit approach in the first instance. But once you are in that process, it's the governing body who make the decisions in terms of how that recovery plan is agreed and then implemented. Our role in those meetings is to support and to challenge and to have those sometimes quite difficult conversations with schools, because we're not talking about easy conversations here. We're talking about schools having to make some really difficult decisions, and we understand that it's not a nice place to be in. It's not what you want your focus to be on actually as a head teacher or a governing body. You want your focus to be on quality of teaching and learning. But as part of the responsibility that we all have within the profession, it is about making sure that we make the best use of the budget that we have. And sometimes difficult decisions have to be made. And so those conversations, we quite often find that the initial conversation with the school is, well, we're not sure what we need to do. We then have a conversation about, well, actually, you could consider this option, you could look at that option. Then it's back to the governing body to decide, because it is the governing body's responsibility to put that recovery plan in place. And then, of course, we work closely with schools to monitor. Outside of that, I have lots of conversations with head teachers at very early doors, when they're looking at their budget, maybe not even for this year, maybe for next year, and looking at what their pupil numbers are looking like. We've talked about, the fall in demography at primary. We've been forecasting that with our schools for a number of years now, and about how schools need to get themselves ready for that position, really, in terms of numbers. So had some really positive conversations, I think, with schools that has then enabled them to take some very early action, which then doesn't bring them to the licence deficit position as well. And hopefully, I think schools hopefully have found that useful, have had meetings with governing bodies as well. But, it's incumbent on everybody in the partnership to look at the best use of the resources and to make sometimes difficult decisions. And we are there to support our head teachers pastorally around that as well. So a school improvement team, the school improvement advisor attached to the school will also understand the pressures that a school might be under in terms of looking at its budget, and will be there to give some advice. Sometimes it's very practical advice. Sometimes it is literally about sitting down and looking at the numbers, looking at how many pupils, what your forecasted pupils are going to be for the next 2, 3, 4 years maybe, and having a look at what your class configurations might look like, and actually what staffing structure you might need moving forward. And then there are always difficult decisions, because sometimes the decisions are about having to stop some things and perhaps focusing on other areas. And that's where I think that fits very closely with the school's self-evaluation process and our self-evaluation process here. Actually, what is going to make the biggest difference? Where should we be putting our resources to make sure that we're doing the best with the resource that we have? Because, a purse is always going to be finite, isn't it? However much is in the pot, we've got a public responsibility to make sure that we maximise that resource and use it effectively. So I think it's probably a journey for schools, I think, particularly where schools have not been in that position previously. And I would hope that, head teachers would be able to assure you that, we are supportive as well as challenging with schools and governing bodies to be able to get those recovery plans in place. We're also very, I think, sensible around what we expect around those recovery plans. We are making sure that, at the end of the day, we still have to offer a provision, a quality of teaching and learning. So we look at the timescale for recovery plans, what is reasonable, what is measured, bearing in mind it is all public money. It's not an individual school's money. It's not an individual portfolio's money. It's the council's money, isn't it? So we have to make sure that we're making best use of that. But we also have to be measured and sensible as well. And I have to pay testament to our head teachers particularly, because I know they spend an awful lot of time looking at this, considering this, reflecting on it, worrying about it. I have to say they do worry, and understandably, because these are difficult decisions, and quite often, as Claire said, sometimes they relate to posts and they relate to provision that the school would like to offer but maybe can't afford for a period of time. But our head teachers are very committed. They're very good at picking up the phone and having that conversation, and I hope that they find that our service is responsive to that need as well. I think, we are all in this together, really, to try and find the best solutions for our children and young people.
Thank you, Vicky. Councillor Priest.
Thank you, Chair. I'll ask the next three together because they're all linked anyway. So given the scale of the budget reduction and the removal of the 0.75 million of secondary support funding, why is there no red rated statistic rate risk explicitly linked to education standards? That's one part of it. What evidence does the authority have that funding reductions have not already begun to impact the quality of teaching support and curriculum breadth? And if Eston were to ask how reduced funding is affecting outcomes, what specific learner level evidence would the authority have? And on the staffing side, how does the authority assess the impact of redundancies, reduced hours and non-replacement of people and posts on class sizes, pastoral support and ALN provision? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Priest. We have a corporate risk, actually, about the system. So, it is in our corporate risk register. There is a very clear risk articulated there about the financial sustainability of schools. So it might not be in this document, but it is certainly in the corporate risk register. So it is clearly, within the public domain.
Can I come back on that one? Is that rated as red in that section? It is rated as red, and we've got access to that.
Yes.
Right, thank you.
Yes, you should be having, as part of the regular reporting, you receive risk updates, don't you, as part of the quarterly reporting cycle within the council. So, no, that's very clearly evidenced. I'm just trying to recall all of your questions. So, at the end of the day, you know, the evidence that we have in terms of our school's performance and whether there is any impact, one of the major pieces of evidence, obviously, is ESTIN inspections. And as we've demonstrated, our ESTIN profile, you know, is strong. So there doesn't seem to be, as yet, any clear evidence that it is the budgetary issues that are impacting on standards. You know, I think the inspection profile speaks for itself. And as Vicky has outlined, you know, the level of detail that is had in the conversations at a school level, you know, and the school's own self-evaluation processes and understanding, you know, how they are managing their resource then, you know, to deliver their curriculum, and how we work closely alongside them, you know, through that process that Vicky's described, to try and mitigate any impact, you know, of the challenges that an individual school may be facing. But again, we have to recognise that at a school level, that is the responsibility of the head teacher and the governing body. But we are very mindful of that. So I can think, I'm not going to name particular schools, but I can think of examples where a school has been in a deficit position. If a school is in a deficit position, they do not have the authority to recruit any staff without the local authorities' oversight of that. But we will have very carefully considered conversations with a school. And actually, we would say to the school, yes, you can re-recruit to a particular post, because actually not to do so would have a negative impact, for example, on the delivery of your curriculum in a subject area, or it may not provide sufficient levels of pastoral support. So I would like to assure this committee that there have been many conversations, you know, with schools in that position where actually the local authority has not driven that school to make necessarily further efficiencies, because in our professional opinion, it would undermine the quality of the provision on offer, or present, you know, other risks potentially around, you know, the safety of the building. You know, and we have done that, you know, on many occasions. So I'd like to give you that assurance that, you know, during that meeting process, we are always working with the school to keep that balance in terms of the quality of the curriculum offer, the safety of the school, you know, the well-being of the pupils as best we can and they can within the resources that are available. There is no doubt that obviously one of the major drivers for schools' financial pressures at the moment is the higher levels of children, you know, presenting with very complex additional learning needs. And perhaps Jeanette might like to chip in on this one, because, you know, Jeanette's done a great deal of work, you know, with our head teachers through a working group to really unpick, you know, the pressures, you know, and that we know is a major driver. You know, we have that statutory responsibility, schools have that statutory responsibility to make those provisions for learners. Jeanette, do you want to give a little bit of a flavour of, you know, how that is sort of being reflected in some of the challenges at a school level?
Thanks, Claire. Just in terms of sort of evidence in support of that, I was thinking, well, I suppose the ultimate evidence would be the level of appeals against the local authority through the Education Tribunal. And in the report, we've referenced 4 there. Now, that's our levels in Flintshire tend to be relatively low. I am aware of an authority that had 36 appeals against them. So when you think of 4 compared to that, you know, we work really hard with schools, with parents, with learners to try and get that provision right. But there's no doubt, I would say, around the increasing pressure perhaps on schools, given the new legislation, to meet the needs of learners through that individual development plan process, where the school are responsible at that first level. There's a higher level of workload around that to make sure that a person-centred process is put in place. So that places demands from a school capacity perspective, but also an understanding of the provision that is required. I think we are in a transitional phase of moving understanding and attitudes around additional learning needs. There's still a view in subquarters that having an additional adult in that classroom will make all the difference for that learner. And in some circumstances it will, but in others it won't. And that's still the gold standard in some people's perspective. And it's working with schools, it's working with parents to understand actually what is the additional learning provision that is required, and that isn't always another adult in that scenario. But coming on to the point that Claire was making, we have sat down with our primary schools in particular, because through some of the meetings that Vicky was holding around finance, ALN was one of the areas that was identified as a concern as having an impact on the budget. And so we've tried to quantify that sort of level of financial pressure in a realistic way, working with school head teachers, working with Vicky and colleagues in finance, and to present some information around that. And we're in the process, aren't we, Claire, really, of bringing that to the attention of council leaders to say this is what we understand that impact to be.
Thank you. Councillor Priest, do you have more questions?
I do, Chair. I think I'm going to let other people actually speak at this moment. I have got loads, but at this point, I think it's necessary for the rest of the committee to have a say as well. Thank you, Chair.
I do appreciate that, thank you. I was a bit concerned that other people might not be having a chance to talk. Councillor Healy, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Can I endorse the remarks that you made initially about your favourable comments about the Education Department, and also the comments that Councillor Christine Jones read out on behalf of the Cabinet member. I think there can't be any doubt that the service knows its schools well and has a very good handle on what is going on. The report begins, as it has to, on picking up on the points made in the Eston inspection in 2019. I was chair of this committee at that particular time, and I do remember it very well. And I do know that our service was engaged in dealing with the recommendations really from the word go, and has been seeking to address the issues, as the report explains, as an ongoing issue, and moving towards getting better and better in terms of the points that were picked up. However, that inspection was 2019, and as the Chief Officer has pointed out, the landscape within education and in Flintshire has changed significantly. Now, the big thing that concerns us is the severity of the financial challenge, and that has become, although it was picked up in the report, it's become a much more serious issue that threatens to undermine curriculum delivery and pastoral support in our schools, and that is a problem. Councillor Priest has picked up on this and rightly scrutinised it with some of her questions, and she wishes to continue, so I won't pursue that one. The other thing that's changed the landscape is, of course, the coronavirus pandemic, and the fact that in a number of areas we're not back to pre-pandemic levels, that attitudes, behaviour, attendance, punctuality, well-being of students has been impacted. And although there are some improvements in some areas, we're still facing challenges in that respect. Now, I want to latch on to one particular issue that schools are identifying that's having an impact on mental well-being and behaviour in their view, and that is the use of mobile phones. I think with the pandemic, we really valued the internet for remote learning and so forth, and schools have become much more adept. I know in the recent period where schools closed, I think they moved much more quickly, or were willing to offer remote learning much more quickly than had previously been the case because there's been a transformation. But also, as far as mobile phones are concerned in the hands of young people, it's a double-edged sword. Can I say from the outset that I am so familiar with the work of this committee that I know that the chief officer's response will be the use of mobile phones in a school is a matter for the individual head teacher and the individual school. So I'm going to ask a slightly more sophisticated question than what is our policy on this. A number of schools are banning them, particularly secondary schools, sometimes at considerable expense to themselves, in that when students come walking in with mobile phones, they have to be stored in a safe facility for each individual phone. And that creates managerial, logistical, and financial issues. I've heard that some schools are spending even up to £10,000 to do that, in spite of the financial challenge. Other schools are just saying you cannot use them in school time, and if people are caught using them, they take them off them, and the parents have to collect them, which doesn't actually cost the school anything. I'm not asking what your policy is. I am asking that if in your conversations with head teachers, you are picking up that mobile phones in schools are a problem and are damaging to mental health and well-being and encouraging bullying and so forth. And of course, we're doing this against the background of international issues with Australia banning social media for under 16s and so forth. So I'm just interested if you picked up on what head teachers generally are saying about this.
Thank you for that question. Claire, please.
Thank you, Councillor Healy. Yes, and you're absolutely right. My first answer will be, obviously, it is at the school's discretion. It is their decision, based obviously on consultation, and I would always hope there would be consultation with their pupils, with their staff and with their parents about whether or not to introduce some restriction in the use of mobile phones. Welsh Government have issued some guidance on it. Welsh Government did not go as far as recommending a nationwide ban on the use of mobile phones in schools, and that some policy guidance has been issued, which obviously we have shared with schools. Vicky and I meet with the federations regularly. Vicky, is there anything that you can think of that particularly, we know some schools have made those individual decisions, and I think those schools have reported a positive impact for doing so. Obviously, if they are investing in particular resources to safely manage the use of those, secure those phones, during the day. Obviously, again, that's decision. It doesn't have to have a cost. It can be as simple as your phone remains in your bag. And I think some schools just simply use that policy. But again, Vicky, I'm not aware of any other particular issues that are coming through. Anything you've picked up through your engagement with the federations?
Not more recently. I think, we're going back, gosh, it may even be a year, but certainly several months ago, where we had some really detailed conversations, particularly with our secondary colleagues around, there was obviously the national discussion through the Senedd and through the research that was done in terms of the impacts of use of mobiles and smartphones in schools. So, our head teachers are very much engaged in those conversations, and I think, as Claire said, it's clear from Welsh Government in terms of the fact that it is a governing body's decision, but I think our heads are very cognizant of the challenges. There are lots of opportunities with technology, and there's always a balance, isn't there? But I think our heads, are very experienced in terms of looking at what the needs of their community are and what the impact might be in their school. Alongside that, then, obviously conversations with our primary colleagues, because our primary and secondary head teacher federations work very closely together. And you'll know, perhaps, as governors, parents and people in the community, that you get that peer pressure element sometimes. While they do this in the high school, therefore we need to do it in year 5 and 6 and so on. So I know that our primary and secondary schools have worked closely together in those conversations to try and, eliminate that pressure, really. So I think our head teachers are very experienced, and certainly from my point of view, I trust their judgment in terms of making the best decisions around their policy decisions for their schools. But it is still relatively new, isn't it, in terms of our life span in terms of the use of technology and the sophistication of technology that we have. So I think it's professionally responsible of us all in the system, whether that's national government, local level, school level, community and parents, to keep abreast of this, to keep looking at this, and to keep looking at what the pressures are, because we are learning, aren't we, in terms of where the positives are, where the opportunities are, but where also the challenges and some of the risks are. And I know that I can see Claire here in terms of our support for schools around online safety particularly, and learners being digitally aware and digitally safe as part of their education as well. That it all goes hand in hand, really, in terms of that process as well. So I think we are doing everything we can and should be doing at this point in terms of monitoring and learning from experiences, really. And I trust our head teachers. They're very aware of the challenges, and I think they make very sensible decisions around that. That's based on what's best for their community.
Thank you, Claire and Vicky. And I can see that you don't feel you have anything else to add to that, because we've had quite a comprehensive answer. Thank you. Councillor Parkhurst, please.
Diolch yn fawr, Chair. And firstly, before I thank the officers, I'd like to thank Councillor Christine Jones for presenting Councillor Eastwood's report in her absence. So thank you, Councillor Jones. I'd like to thank the officers as well for a very comprehensive report. I'd be interested, not now necessarily, but just in passing, how many hours it takes to produce that, because it's a very full report. It would just be interesting to know that. I think reading it in its entirety, to me, it is slightly rose tinted. I think there are some aspects in the report which present a sort of one-sided flavour, or at least not completely representing the overall picture. One example of that could be the food and fun reference, which is on page 96, where there are some very impressive statistics about the pupils who tried a new food. 89%, 95% made new friends, 100% tried a new activity. All fantastic stuff, great programme, but it only reaches a handful of schools. And I don't think that is sufficiently drawn out in the report into how other schools who don't participate, how those children might benefit, particularly the children who are disadvantaged. I want to go on to page 108, and just as an aside, I find it a little difficult because there is limited paragraphing, references. This is paragraph 2.1, and then I have to sort of scroll through to see where I'm actually referring to. But I want to just have a look at that expression about strong leadership. Clearly, we have a very competent and high caliber of senior officers around this table and within the council, below them, a fantastic team. I'm just concerned about the inclusion of political leadership, because I don't think it's the place of the officer team to be commenting on the quality of the political leadership in the council. And line 2 of paragraph 2.1 does specifically refer to the leader of the council. And when we had at the meeting of full council in December, and the cabinet member again was not able to attend, she did provide answers to the many questions which members of the public had raised. But the impression that was left was that she hadn't done so, because the leader, and indeed none of the other cabinet members, chose to either answer those questions or indicate that answers had been provided. And that, to me, is not strong leadership, because it is, basically not taking ownership of the responses, because they were probably quite difficult answers to give. So I would just challenge the wisdom of including that comment. And in any case, what is strong leadership? In my own former life, I was very much aware of Fred Goodwin, who led the Royal Bank of Scotland. And he led the bank with very strong leadership. No one would effectively challenge him. And by his intended takeover of ABN AMRO Bank, he led RBS into collapse. So, strong leadership in itself is not necessarily a good thing. What we need is wise leadership, good leadership. And I would like to see more emphasis on that. Just moving on to page 110, where we have, and again, I'm struggling to find this because of the lack of sub-paragraph numbers. But essentially, thank you. Essentially, what is being said here is that, let me just find this note. I beg your pardon. Yeah, we have. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to just read this bit again. No, I'm going to leave that point. I'm going to move on to another point to avoid holding that up. So I want to now look at page 114, just moving on slightly, where there is reference to strong relationships between the trade unions and the education service. And elsewhere, there is reference to good relationships between the portfolio managers and the CIW and Roman Catholic education directors. We are aware that there have been a number of industrial disputes by teaching staff which are non-pay related. And again, I don't think this report draws out the situation where there are tensions between the schools and the representatives and the education service. And in fact, there are two high schools which have indicated what might be termed loss of confidence in the council's education service. So again, I don't think this report really pulls that out. And then finally, you'll be relieved to know, on page 126, there is reference to DBS checks. But there is no reference here to the failures in the DBS process, which have been identified through internal audit, which potentially exposes children to significant risk. And I think that should have been included. So overall, Chair, I don't think this report really reflects the complete picture. Jochen Val.
I think that some of your comments relate to more recent matters that are actually not covered by this particular report, but the matters that you were relating to are going to be discussed at a future meeting, some of them. But I'll hand over to Claire.
Yes, thank you, Chair. You've partly answered that question for me. So the industrial disputes that you refer to are a matter between some members of staff and the governing body of the school. What this report here is most referenced is actually the work at a more corporate level in terms of our engagement with unions at sort of that branch level and national level as well, in terms of creating, you know, positive working relationships through, for example, the Education Consultative Committee and School Budget Forum and things like that. So, you know, at the end of the day, that if there is an industrial dispute at a school level, that is a matter for the school, obviously, and those particular union officers to try and find a resolution to. But the point that the chair quite rightly makes is that, you know, what you are referring to is outside of the timeline of the scope of this report, because actually it happened in the autumn term of 2025, and this report obviously is for 24-25 to the end of the academic year. You have requested further information about that, and we are bringing a report to you as part 2 of the next part of the scrutiny committee meeting. But I have to say, even in those instances, myself personally and other officers of this team did a huge amount of work to engage constructively with the union representatives to hear the concerns that they were raising about the issues within a particular school between some members of staff and the employer. And actually, you know, there have been some positive outcomes through those discussions, and the relationships between those union members and senior officers of the portfolio continues to be positive, because we all recognise that we need to work together to support the school in addressing whatever the issues are then that are potentially causing some of their staff members some disquiet. So I don't think we need to talk about that, you know, anymore today. You referenced 2 high schools again. Loss of confidence. Again, I don't think it's appropriate that we're discussing that in this meeting today. To my mind, there has been one public commentary from one particular school, but again, we will discuss that more in part 2 in the following meeting. But as I'm sure you will appreciate, Councillor Parkers, there are very varied and complex reasons that, you know, somebody may be dissatisfied about the council's actions, and, you know, that is one side of the story. So I think I don't really particularly want to say any more about that. The DBS audit, you know, yes, there were some aspects of practice around DBS that, you know, was identified by the audit team that needed to be strengthened. There is an audit action plan. That plan is being worked through, and again, in the next committee meeting, we are bringing forward to you, at your request, a detailed report on the progress of the actions against those DBS. But, you know, in the main, you know, our school recruitment processes are robust in terms of ensuring the safety of our learners. Claire, is there anything you would want to add for that? Because you've been very helpfully leading some of the work around that action plan.
Thank you, Claire. Just in regard to the context of where that DBS reference comes up on that page, that is actually findings from the self-evaluation and annual report from schools for the previous year, 23-24. So those were the common themes that were coming up from schools during that period that I was then able to reference during this report. So that at that point, we hadn't had an agreed action plan or anything in place following the audit, we wrote this over the summer. We had the meetings with audit committee over the summer, and then the plan was published at the same time. So the timings wise, that is why it's not referenced in here, because at that time it wasn't in place, if that makes sense. I totally recognise what you've said, and I do want to reassure you that the action plan is firmly underway. Lots of work has already gone on, and we will bring that to you in the next report, but I'm happy to update you on that at the next meeting.
Thank you for that. Moving on now, Councillor Mackie, please.
Thank you, Chair. I too would like to express my thanks to the Cabinet member for passing on the comments from the Education Cabinet member. Thank you very much. That's very much appreciated, and I'm sure she will agree with that. I'd like to thank the officers for the report. And just as a sort of foreword, I'd like to say that no members of this committee, to my knowledge, have had a discussion about this meeting today. Sometimes we do have, but we haven't today. Because from what I can see, we all seem to be making roughly the same sort of comment, and that's what I want to do. I think what we're saying is that the slant of the report could be slightly different. I'm not saying I disagree with the report. One member's already said he thought it was rather rose tinted. I'm not saying it's necessarily rose tinted, but it might be a bit pink tinted, in my opinion. So I'm really saying that I would like certain things that I'm going to mention to be given a little bit more thought. First of all, I'm looking at page 7, and I am somewhat restricted because we no longer have iAnnotate on our iPad, so it's difficult to mark a particular location. On page 7, I want to mention exclusions. And I don't know a head teacher anywhere who wants to exclude anybody. They all don't want to do it. The issue is, though, that caring, special caring of young people with the problems that have emerged from the pandemic requires resources. And when resources are being reduced and limited, those resources aren't available. And sometimes because of that, exclusions are more likely to take place simply because there's nothing else the school's got left to do. I have seen wonderful, wonderful examples of staff going way past out of their comfort zone to really work with pupils who are having difficulties. And schools do go out of their way, but as resources reduce, capacity, spare capacity isn't there, and that situation is more difficult. And I feel that should be mentioned. On page 8, we're talking about ALN. I think we've gone a long way down the track, but I don't think we've got it right. I hear when I'm discussing ALN with schools, it's a long process. It requires a great deal of effort, and that often from senior leadership personnel. Sometimes I'm told the process just takes a long time. And sometimes I'm told we don't have that person, but we can't call on a budget in order to add that person into our school. There's no external budget, but we don't have that available money in our budget. But we need that extra because the plan says so. So I would like to bring that feeling, if that's all it is, into the report, because I think that's important. I think that's very important. Page 10, I've talked about school I've written my note here that I'm concerned about school finance, but at this moment in time, why I wrote that has escaped me. So we'll go on. Page 19. Now, here I really was just a minute. Thank you. Here I was lost. Sorry, page 20. We seem to be using these capped scores as sort of our benchmarks. No, I'm glad you said that, because I hope they're not. But what I didn't see was any GCS results. Now, I know for a fact, because I've read it, that the minister's statement about not publishing data excluded Key Stage 4 data. And I know you'll say, oh, it's Mackie again saying the same thing. The passport young people take out of Key Stage 4 is their GCSE. That passport is what will or will not get them an interview for a job. Or it will be some, or into some further education. It's what they work for all the time they're in their school up until Key Stage 4. And I think that's important. The Welsh Government is very good at changing the way information's reported to it when the facts aren't very comforting towards them. They did this with the ambulance service when it was having a bit of a problem. They changed the way that ambulance times would be reported. And then a couple of years later, they changed them again because they still weren't meeting the new targets. I'm going to ask you a simple question. Does anybody here think the ambulance service has improved in the last 5 years? It didn't work for them. Why does going on to CAPS scores likely to work for us? The worrying thing we have is our PISA position. The worrying thing we have is our GCSE results on a county-wide basis, not school by school, county basis. And that's why I think that's what we should base our decisions on. I appreciate fully that young people go to school to learn a great deal more than just pass exams. That comes out in interviews for jobs during the interview. That's what the interview is about. Will this person fit into this role? Is this person the right person for this job? Those more detailed information comes then. But the ticket into that interview is the GCSE in many, many cases. You can't escape that. And here we're on the border of England, and clearly our young people compete with people from England. And that's why I think this is so important. Thank you very much. I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mackie, as always, for your passion on this subject. Claire, please.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Mackie. We really appreciate your perspective. I believe we've actually included far more statistical data in this report this year than we have done in the last few years, in response to your comments in previous meetings, Councillor Mackie, that you would like to see more data, which is why we have included more tables in the section, using some of the key indicators that we do have available in the public domain to try, and give you that flavour. So, we obviously still haven't got it quite right, Councillor Mackie, but, we made a real conscious effort to include more data, and the report does reference, obviously, that, Welsh Government is still, it has gone through a period of consultation on trying to create a coherent national data landscape. We've all been on this journey, haven't we, where we used to have tables of comparative data. And then, obviously, the Cabinet Secretary made the decision that that was influencing unduly, perhaps some head teachers' behaviours in the way that, data was being used and decisions made about learners. So there was a real, there was a moral purpose behind, I think, her decision at the time to remove the use of data below the national level and focus that at a school level. It was for schools to use their data to drive their own improvement purposes. Of course, we've then had COVID. We have had adjustments to the examination processes over a number of years. We've had, centre-determined grades. We've had adjustments in the grade boundaries, with the examination board. So, we've had for a number of years a position where making year-on-year comparisons is just not possible because of the change every year in the way that data has been generated. So, and I know you recognise that. So, that has limited our ability, perhaps to report in that way. Obviously, at the time that we were drafting this report, the summer series of GCSE and A-level results, were not verified. So I do believe we have on the forward work programme, a report to come to you later this term. So actually, once that data is verified and we've got a very clear position, we will be bringing you a more detailed report, obviously, about learner outcomes in Flintshire. So yeah, I understand your ongoing frustration, but again, I think we've always been very clear that until we've got that national reporting landscape, so we're not comparing apples with pears, and we all are reporting on the same things that are of value in terms of you being able to scrutinise our performance as a portfolio, and effectively, you know, you're scrutinising the performance of our schools. You know, that's their job fundamentally, isn't it, to support their learners? Our job is to support them and, you know, and enhance their ability to enable those learners to, you know, to obviously achieve their potential. So I do appreciate it's still a very complex picture, but I thought, I'm sure Councillor Mackie will be happy at this time because we've got tables of data in the report. But we keep trying, Councillor Mackie. And I think Vicky and Jeanette, you also may want to perhaps add some comments to that. So I will hand over. Vicky, do you want to go first?
Thank you. No, I welcome the discussion, Councillor Mackie, because it's an interesting discussion over the landscape that we've had with Welsh Government decisions around performance measures over the last few years. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, within the new school improvement guidance, which has just been published, you know, this is very much part of that conversation as well. And it's certainly a conversation I have with colleagues at Welsh Government in terms of what is useful information, because, you know, data needs to be useful, doesn't it, in terms of, you know, what is it telling us, where is it asking us to look. So I think, you know, you mentioned particularly the CAP 9. I mean, these are interim measures. They've been interim for a while, I will say that. So we're working within that landscape. And I think probably everybody agree we haven't quite got it right yet nationally in terms of what they tell us. But we have been through, as you said yourself, a difficult period in terms of COVID and the impact around that. The CAP 9 point particularly, I think, has to be really understood in terms of what it's telling us, and then it asks more questions. So you mentioned sort of, you know, looking at what a local authority data set might look like. Actually, with the CAP 9, really, it's about actually looking at individual school and looking at individual cohorts and then individual learners. So those are the conversations that our supporting improvement advisors have with our schools, because the CAP 9 is about GCSEs. So I wouldn't want members to think that these figures are not about GCSEs. It's GCSEs and their equivalent qualifications that underpin these. But I think what the CAP 9 is particularly trying to focus on, and you can see from the other indicators, is those core educational skills really around literacy, numeracy, and science qualifications, what we used to call the old core. But the non-core are important as well, and that is where the CAP 9 has tried to include reference to the non-core, because we had a system before where, if you remember, when we talk about level 2+, where, you know, there was perhaps a lot of work in that space to perhaps focus more on some subjects than others, and some of the really important non-core qualifications needed to be referenced. So that's where, to be fair, the CAP 9 has really tried to sort of capture that. And, you know, absolutely, there isn't a benchmark. And, you know, we've been very clear with our schools. It's not about point scoring against each other. It is about understanding your curriculum offer and your qualification offer for your learners that is appropriate for them. And that will change from cohort to cohort. We actually ask a lot of our schools to be able to adapt their curriculum and their qualification offer amidst a changing landscape of qualifications nationally to meet the needs of their learners. So we've presented, that's the information that is there publicly available on my local school. I think Councillor Priest, you referenced about different timescales for results. That was the verified data that we had for last year. We're just finishing the process now of verifying the data from last summer's results, because there are layers, and obviously that's a national process. But I wouldn't want you to think these results aren't about GCSEs. And I think we've also included here what that looks like from a Flintshire perspective. So I think you talked to Councillor Mackie about not just looking at individual schools, but looking at what it looks like for Flintshire. So on page 21 onwards, you can see those the results really for Flintshire, broken down perhaps into gender as well and compared with Wales. And that's a difficult conversation in terms of what does that actually mean? Where should we sit in that process? And again, it will change from year to year. But what I would like to reassure members on is that underneath this headline data, there are real substantive professional conversations happening between our school improvement team and head teachers. And I would hope at governing body level as well, So elected members who are governors, I would expect that you would be having robust discussions around what this data means for you in your school context as well, because it's all those parts that then make up the whole, isn't it, in terms of provision. But I think it's an ongoing conversation, Councillor Mackie, and hopefully when we're sitting here this time next year, we'll have some new change, because I think, you know, it probably is time for a bit of change. These were interim measures brought in for a period of time to take us on a journey. And I think, you know, that those conversations are moving forward, and we are committed as a team to giving you whatever information we feel, you know, that is useful for you to understand the outcomes in our schools. But I wouldn't want you to think it's not about GCSEs, because it is GCSEs and their equivalents and A-level and level 3 qualifications that sit behind these performance measures. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. Just before I bring Jeanette, and just say, you know, table 9 on page 23, we've never put a table in the self-evaluation report before that actually lists our individual schools. So I think, you know, we were really trying to, you know, pull together, as Vicky says, it is publicly available information from my local schools, you know, so that, you know, we were trying to bring some of that core information, as Vicky has described, to you in one place, so that you weren't having to go and sort of look, because I know you do, Councillor Mackie, you go through my local schools, you know, across the county. So again, it was an effort to try and bring some of that key information to you. But let me go to Jeanette, Chair, if I may, so she can speak from an inclusion perspective. We always do. We really welcome these discussions.
I feel there's a way of doing scrutiny.
Absolutely.
Which hopefully creates that situation. Sorry, Chair.
And we really welcome that, Councillor Mackie. We really do enjoy our robust conversations with you and all of our. I mean, that's part of our function, isn't it? As a portfolio, that's what we're here for. Your job is to scrutinise us. Absolutely, you know, that's bread and butter for us. But we really welcome these detailed conversations. Jeanette, over to you.
Thank you, Claire. Just to pick up on what you said about exclusions and ALN, so I'll move away from data tables. You know, I think the point that you made, schools don't want to exclude. They don't. I think the challenge for us as an authority is the approaches in schools will vary. And that's not a judgmental comment, that is fact. And that will be related to priorities in the school at that time. It will be related to their behaviour policies. And I think what we've tried to focus on over the last 12 months that's been reported in this is about how do we stop situations escalating in a school situation that lead to an unnecessary exclusion. And I think, you know, we've referenced the training that's been offered through Plasterwen, through the Team Teach, which is all about de-escalation, and trauma-informed practice, which is about understanding why a child may come in and in lesson 2 be swearing at a teacher. And I think that is really important work that we all need to do, and we all need to understand that there are going to be situations and factors that may lead to a child being excluded where there are other factors that need to be considered. And schools, that's not easy. That's not easy for a school, and that's not easy for a head teacher, because they're put in a position where they need to be seen to be doing right by any child that's been hurt in that process, or right by the members of staff in school. So it's not just about resources. I think it is about that wider culture in schools as well. And also, if we're talking about roles and responsibilities, it's about yourselves as governors ensuring that the practice within your school is appropriate for the learners in those environments as well. So it's not an easy one to crack. And, you know, we're certainly not sitting here and saying that we are happy with the levels of exclusion, and we are working collaboratively. I think that's come through the report, to try and make sure that we are using all of our resources and all of our opportunities to engage with schools to reduce those levels, because nobody wants that for their learners. It's appropriate that there are suitable sanctions in response to actions, but it is about them being suitable and reasonable, isn't it? And it's, you know, we are pleased that the levels of high level of exclusion are reducing. Just on the ALN process, well, we had great hopes for ALNet. You know, I will go back to an age-old thing that I've said. We started that process of review back in 2007. And here we are with a process that is being reviewed already. So it was implemented 2021, and the Welsh Government has said it needs to be reviewed. We've got legislation that has been described as intellectually challenging. So the fact that 22 authorities, health boards and everybody have to interpret that in such a way is a real challenge. The benefit of the legislation that is really coming through the review is the person-centred approach. And if we think back to statementing process, you know, some of us might hanker back to that now, but we are in a new system which is very much placed the focus on that child. To support schools to be able to make those decisions, you know, the decision that was taken as a council was to delegate its ALM funding, to be able to say, right, you are going to determine what your child's needs are. You are going to determine what the provision, what the additional learning provision is needed to meet those needs. And we're going to allocate the budget to you to be able to do it. Is it sufficient? Well, we've sort of alluded to that in a conversation earlier this afternoon. But the process behind it was to enable schools to make decisions. Because previously they would have come to the local authority, we'd have looked at the data and gone, oh yeah, you can have 5 hours, you can have 10 hours, and it's not personalised to that child. So I would agree in terms of a very challenging legislative process that is heavy in terms of ALNCO role, and that is something again that Welsh Government are looking at, but premise behind it is sound in terms of it being person-centred. Are we there yet in terms of an ideal new system? I would say no, and hopefully the reviews from Welsh Government will bring about some additional clarity and maybe change in that process.
Thank you for those answers. I understand, Matt, you wish to speak.
Yeah, thank you. It's been really interesting listening to the questions, really, and it's made me reflect on a lot of the services that we do offer through the youth service and as part of the wider support services for schools. So really, just to endorse what Jeanette has said, I think we're working really hard to find positive solutions to effectively keep children, young people in school, and enabling them to be in a position that they can actually learn. So, turning up at school, having gone through a number of different scenarios, different backgrounds, but whether that young person or not is ready to be in that environment, and then adhere to a way or with the behaviour policy and be in a positive place, positive mindset, so that they can learn is challenging for many of our young people. So, we're part of the support service, but we've got youth workers within a number of schools where we'll do that one-to-one intervention, that group work, where we take young people out of classrooms to enable them really to address some of those kind of major issues and minor issues which affect them from learning and maybe then present as behavioural issues. So we really look at that relationship and that transaction between young person and teacher and address it in that way. What's been really positive in the last sort of 18 months is the work on the belonging strategy, because that does focus a lot more on relationships rather than behaviour. And I think that's where from our perspective, that's where the biggest difference will come in. The other thing from Councillor Priest's questions earlier around funding, these are the challenges that we face, because if we had more money, we'd be able to do more of this work. And I think that, it's a double-edged sword, really, because sometimes we do as much as we can in a positive way as possible to have the biggest impact that we can with what we've got. But do we want to do more? Yes. And actually, we are making the case where this process works, but we can't afford to do more of it. And I think that's the biggest challenge. That's the biggest frustration. And I think not only do we need to articulate that, and I'm thinking about it from my own self-evaluation to make sure that comes through, because I'll be leaning back on this committee to take that to Welsh Government for us. So rightly there's a challenge, but that challenge has to be both ways in terms of we need help to be able to do more of it. So yeah, I think it's hopefully some reassurance for the committee that beyond, I know there's a lot of focus on the schools, but the support services are very heavily invested in putting that team around the school and around the young people to enable that learning to take place and that the behaviours to come through in a really positive way, but also the attainment and then all the associated factors with that, which we don't have to go into today, but in terms of youth justice or homelessness or NEET and all of those other things that play out really if we don't address those things at an earlier in an earlier way.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, Councillor Lister, please.
I'm still just taking in what Matt says, because that exactly, isn't it? It's exactly that, and that honesty with elected members who make the decisions and allocate resources. It's got to come through every report that's given to us for us to be able to know how much we can afford to take off schools. We've got to have a very true picture of what it is actually like in schools, and the challenges you face. And I completely understand that, yes, there are a lot of good things, and yes, we want to do more to make it even more effective. What I did actually want to ask was about the data, and I really appreciated the tables. Thank you very much. I know I was one of the people requesting data last year, so I was really grateful to see it. And I just thought maybe an explanation of what actually goes into the CAP 9 score might help, because I believe it's your top 9 GCSE results that are allocated a nominal number to the grade that's added up. And so a high score indicates that your school is doing quite well, and a low score indicates that it's not. And from that does then sort of ask questions, really, because we've got a comparison between 2023 and 2024, and we can see in nearly every measure except for the Welsh back that we have declined. Our standards have declined. And actually, I'm wondering, I know you haven't provided 2020-25 data yet, but if that was to decline again, then that RAG could potentially go to a red, and we need to know that, and we need to understand why that is, and also sort of ask you, really, what are your effective measures to try and bring standards up? And, you know, on the big picture of this whole self-evaluation document, it's great to see the big flagship moments and the celebrations, but this part of this report has a very strong weighting, the outcomes of our learners at Key Stage 4 when they're going out into the world. And I know it's not all about grades and data, and it's about all the other schools that children come out with, but it is a very good indicator of how the schools are performing, and whether the children are equipped to go on and be contributing members of society. So yeah, this bit on the data is very heavily weighted, and it's all amber. So we have to ask questions about that. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Lister. Vicky.
Thanks, Councillor Lister. I know that we've had conversations about the data, so I'm pleased that you acknowledge we've put some more data in the report for this time. Yeah, apologies about the definition of CAP 9. I suppose we've discussed it so many times at committee, and it does come under our glossary around when we look at the data more in other reports. But yeah, it is very much about understanding what that means. And I suppose there's a couple of points that I would perhaps sort of throw back as conversation, really, that how do we determine what is a high, what is a low capped point score? Because that is not a given. And as I said, it does very much depend on what that curriculum offer is. So it's very difficult. We can sort of have approximations where we think, but using the terminology high, low capped 9 score is in itself problematic. And I suppose I do have to take issue in terms of the point where you made with standards, that the tables show us that standards have declined. We're not actually able to make that commentary from those tables, because we cannot compare year on year. So because of the changes to the qualifications and the assessments for GCSEs and A-levels during the pandemic, there were mitigations put in place in terms of the provision for examinations and in terms of the measures. So we cannot compare 23 and 24, and I think I've put that in the context prior to that for members. So, due to the different awarding arrangements that took place, results between 2020 and 2023 are not directly comparable to each other, and we cannot therefore compare 2024 either, because Qualifications Wales also maintain some grading flexibility for that examination series. So that's the challenge, really. It goes back to the conversation with Councillor Mackie. That is the challenge about how we can make decisions and judgments just based on that raw data, because we cannot say that standards have declined from that year to that year here. We can't, because that is not factually correct based on that data. And the reason why we were not able to include the 2025 results in this report is because when this report was completed for the 2024 to 25 academic year, we'd only just had the examination series in the August, and the verification process, which members will be aware, continues through the autumn term, and we get that final verified data around about this time. And I have to say, sometimes it's late as well, so we're never quite sure what date is coming. So that's the only reason when we bring it forward in the next reports, you will get the 2025 data. What I can encourage members to do is to keep an eye on My Local Schools, because you will see there that as soon as that data is verified, Welsh Government will update that with the 2025 results that are in this table.
Yeah. So the data hasn't been verified for 2025 yet?
It's coming to the end of that process. It will then be Sorry. It's coming to the end of that process. It will then be updated on My Local Schools imminently. I haven't checked today whether it's been done today, for example, but it will be at this point.
Isn't a criticism of the portfolio in any way, but that data, it will impact the decisions that we make next month for the budget. Like it's all too late, isn't it? When you're looking at kind of how schools are performing.
Firstly, we don't control that process. That is Welsh Government process with Qualifications Wales and the examination bodies, because obviously that there is a lot of data, there are a lot of learners, there are a lot of examinations that have to be verified. You'll know yourself that there are appeals processes that take, the initial qualification results that learners get. There are appeals and there are successful appeals that change that process early on in the autumn term as well. So we have no control at local authority level. What I would say is that data on its own, again, should not be looked at in isolation. So I think that is the point that I am, sort of trying to make to the committee, that the data in itself does not give us a definitive answer in terms of where we think standards are. We have to understand that is a more complex process around looking at the quality of leadership, looking at the quality of teaching and learning within the classroom. And I think it's fair to say that the ESTIM process absolutely recognises that as well. We used to have a process that was very data-led to begin with, and actually that caused problems. It led to behaviours that probably we didn't want in the system. It led to focus on just a number rather than a child, rather than a curriculum offer. So I really wouldn't want to go down that process again. So I think we have to be very considered when we're looking at data. And as I say, the challenge is between the period of 2020, 2025, we can't say over a three-year period, this looks like that, because we've got to drill under and look at what it looks like in a school context and within that national context where we had a very different landscape for qualifications because of COVID. And that's the reality. We can't change that. That's what, and we are now coming out of that process. So, hopefully in future years, we will perhaps have a clearer line of questioning to ask in terms of what, data, for example, on, science qualifications looks like over a 3-year period. However long we have the CAP 9 score as an interim measure, what that might look like. But I think it is really important that we are cautious and careful in terms of any evaluative statements we make based just on data in the table, because it is far more complex than that. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. Councillor Madison, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for all the team who produced this report, which I read with pleasure. I had 4 sets of committee papers to read this week, and this is the one that I actually enjoyed the most. And that's possibly because I think that education with health is the most important thing that there is. That education is a privilege, and as somebody who was educated at 2 state inner city schools, that it's the only way of lifting yourself out of the poverty trap. I enjoyed reading about all of the projects, and we have had presentations on some of the projects in committee. So I enjoyed reading about Goliath and Athena and Consent and Little Blackbird, the Forest School. I enjoyed reading about some of the support services, such as the counselling support service and the NEAT service, and projects such as Period Dignity, which was something that I helped to introduce to Group Llandrillo Menai 10 years ago, and I'm immensely glad that the name has been changed from Period Poverty to Period Dignity. That's a very, very important use of terminology and does show the importance of education. So really, I just have a very, very simple question, or at least I think it's simple in any case. As councillors, how can we best support you in moving forward by understanding what is the greatest financial challenge to schools? What is the cause of financial challenge? And what is the greatest challenge to deficits in schools? How can we, I think we need to understand this in order to help you move forward. And the stuff that you're doing around exclusion and truancy, which is something I know a bit about because I used to be a foster carer as well. So I'm focusing back on the finance. What are your greatest financial challenges? What causes the deficits? What's the greatest cause and how can we help? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Mallison. I think we've probably touched on this already. So we're in a perfect storm, and we have been for a number of years, where we have seen Flintshire as and I'm going to work very hard not to stray into any kind of political domain here. It's not my job. But, we all recognise, don't we, that out of the 22 local authorities, because of the funding formula, Flintshire Council is one of the lowest funded. So we've had those discussions many times, haven't we, across the chamber about how then that, that sort of limited resource then, that's more challenging for us to manage. So that's the first instance, isn't it, is the funding that comes into the local authority. And how everybody works very hard to apportion that funding to, obviously to have the greatest impact, not just in education, but across all of our services. So then if we then start drilling down into the education portfolio, and from our schools perspective, so contextually, we've had that very difficult landscape for the last couple of years. And, council has made the difficult decision that, schools have not received all of the uplift potentially that they needed in terms to meet those pressures. That top slice has been applied. Obviously, that's going to be a decision, for members going forward. But I think we have presented to you in a variety of reports, including this one, the level of risk around our deficit position in our schools at the moment. And obviously that will be for council to determine whether or not they feel applying any further cut to schools' delegated budgets is appropriate. But, I think we've given you plenty of evidence about what the risks around that would be. So that's a challenge. You then add in the layer of obviously cost pressures, inflationary pressures, significant, pay rises, teachers' pay rises have been generous, support staff, so all of those inflationary pressures, we've had issues with energy costs, over many years as well. So, those inflationary pressures, obviously, it takes more and more out of the school's budget, doesn't it, to deal with it. We've got a falling pupil demography. So we have fewer children in our schools. Our school budgets are pupil number driven. Every pupil obviously comes with a proportion of funding. So fewer pupils in a school, that's less budget going into the school. And you will know through other discussions and future reports to come before you that obviously that is creating a huge number of surplus places across our school estate. That is inefficient use then of the resource that we have when schools are having to heat classrooms and maintain buildings, that are a third or even half empty. And I know there are challenges around school organisational change, but again, we have to recognise that is a drain on schools' resources because that reduction in pupil numbers obviously is having an impact at that school level. And as Jeanette has clearly articulated today, because of the massive changes in terms of the national legislation combined with better identification potentially of pupil with learning needs and the impact of the pandemic, we are seeing shifts, aren't we, with more children presenting with a neurodiverse profile, for example, that we are seeing more complex learners not only in our specialist provision, but actually within our mainstream schools as well. And schools having, as Jeanette, rightly articulated, the importance of the school being able to meet the needs of those learners. We would want every learner wherever possible to be educated, obviously, in their local mainstream school, recognising that some children, may may need, more specialist support, which obviously is costly, higher teacher and support ratios, for example. So we do know that the ALN pressures are particularly having an impact, on school budgets. So I would say some of those are the major factors. Vicky, is there anything else you would want to add, reflecting on the conversations that you have with schools through that budgetary management process? I mean, those are the main ones, aren't they? Is there anything else I haven't alluded to?
No, I don't think so. I think those are the main discussions. I think sometimes some of the challenges as well for schools, in terms of future planning, sort of knowing what their budget may be from year to year, that can be a challenge. And, I've had conversations with governing bodies where, sometimes say, well, if I'd known this 3 years ago, we might not have made this decision. Well, it's difficult, is it? Hindsight, crystal balls and so on. But, ultimately, it is about the number of pupils, and I think the biggest impact, certainly in our primary sector, has been around the pupil demography and the need, the fact that there are less children in the system. And so that's, some of the conversations with governors have really been focused on how they manage that, because you then have to think about how it works through each school year. So it's not just for that financial year, it's the implications for the forthcoming years as that lower number of children work through the school. And that's the bit really that, and ultimately schools might have a surplus, but a surplus is a one-off, isn't it? When you use your surplus for what, it's gone. So it's about making sure that the decisions of the governing body are looking at what the in-year spend is year on year. So that's where our conversations really focus.
I mean, we don't get, as a council, do we, 3-year budgets from Welsh Government? So immediately then we as a council are working on that year-to-year basis. So equally, our schools, we can't give our schools 3-year budgets. So, but we do try to give them as much information through Jenny's team, pupil forecast. Obviously, we know the number of children that are in the system. Obviously, the challenge is knowing what the numbers are going to be coming through. Obviously, you do have the live birth data, but obviously we don't know necessarily where those children are and which schools they might attend, because that's about parental choice. So it's about when we start to see them hitting our early years provision, for example. We have our nursery and reception admission rounds, and we see that's where we're seeing those lower numbers coming through. But obviously, if the children in the system, generally, you can forecast and head teachers can say, well, if I've got 27 children in year 1 this year, they're going to be 27 children in year 2 next year, and they can, as Vicky says, you can sort of project going through to give you, a broad idea of what your pupil population is likely to be, over the next 2, 3, 4 years, as you say, for governing bodies and head teachers to be able to make, informed decisions about how they manage their budget. So I think, it is a complex landscape, Councillor Madison, and I hope we've answered your question in terms of sort of the key factors really that are putting the pressure on schools. We all recognise, don't we, at every level, we would want more money in the system. I think what we're trying to demonstrate, through the report is that, we're trying to squeeze the best value out of every penny that we've got going into our schools, whether it's either through the core funding, through the council, through the grant funding that we receive from Welsh Government, that have very stringent terms and conditions that we meet. A significant proportion of that grant funded is delegated to schools to support ALN, to support professional learning. So we are really robust in delegating that funding out to schools, and sometimes we are constrained by those terms and conditions. So if I go back to Councillor Parker's question around the holiday hunger programme, and you rightly say that's not in every school, and I'm going to turn to Claire here because obviously she's one of the key members and stuff. We have terms and conditions imposed upon us by Welsh Government for that funding, and it's around the percentage of free school meal. Is there anything you could add to that, Claire? So we would love to have it in every school, but we do not receive sufficient funding to enable that to happen. Is there any context there? I'm just conscious perhaps that was a question of Councillor Parker's we haven't responded to, but I think it sits within this context of how actually some of our grant funding has to be determined.
Thank you. Yeah, they do all have their own terms and conditions, as with all grant funding. And actually, it's not just regarding the schools that are eligible, but of those that are eligible. Sorry, I can't put my teeth in. Some of them don't want to do it. Some of them haven't got the staff to do it. So we have offered and we have been growing our programme slowly year on year. So if you've been following this from the start, I think we started with 2 schools, didn't we? 2017-18 year. We're now over 10. We've been higher. We've dropped a few. There's some movement in there in those numbers, but You know, the reality is that recruiting school staff to work in the holidays is actually quite difficult. We are looking, and we are in, you know, in terms of the spirit of collaboration that we've been talking about in the directorate, you know, we're working with Matt's team about, you know, the play scheme and how the staff that are employed as part of the play scheme, whether we can utilise those in schools. And we are working to make sure that young people are offered, say if they have food and fun provision in the morning, that they could then go to play scheme in the afternoon. So then potentially they've got access then to a full day of care. But you know, it is a balancing act really, in terms of the school wants to be able to offer this provision, but ultimately, even if the head teacher or the governors are supportive, if staff don't want to work, it's really difficult. But we are, you know, we have actively been trying to recruit schools, and we have got, you know, I'm really pleased that we've got over half of the secondaries involved now, and we want to grow the secondary engagement in food and fun, and particularly to support that transition work with those young people who are moving up for them that summer. So that's our priority at the moment, is to grow the area of the secondaries. And those are conversations that are ongoing, but now is the time for us to be having them, because prior to end of financial year, obviously WLGA would like to know which schools are signed up, and they need to budget for that accordingly. So those are the conversations we are having. So I hope I can bring you some more positive news once we've had those in the coming weeks, really. So thank you.
Thank you. We're coming up to we've just passed the 2-hour mark. I normally have a comfort break at this point. So I know that Councillor Priest wishes to speak again. Do you think we benefit from the break, or would you wish to continue? Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, there's two of you to ask questions. Sorry, I didn't see your hand before.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to thank all the officers for this robust conversation that we've had today. It has been very, very detailed, as per the report, which I mentioned before. I've got to agree with Councillor Lister that the report is a self-assessment up to page 38. And then the rest of it could have been divided up into the areas to support it. But on the whole, you can use that report. As you said, it would sit great to actually show the good work that has been done in education over the years. I did have a list of questions. I'm going to scrap them. I'm going to scrap them, apart from the one that I've got here that is almost like has been answered. The question was, at what point does financial pressure risk non-compliant with statutory duties, particularly around ALN and safeguarding? Are we at that point? And I think that has been answered by yourselves and the team, that we are at that point. We are at that risk level. So, Chair, I'd like to add to our recommendations, add a motion there that this committee, the first part is supporting your actual report, but for education's budget not to be touched and decreased at any issue whatsoever, that it needs to stay or to rise. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Priest. I have actually revised the recommendation slightly, but we'll add that to it. Thank you. Councillor Shawcross.
Yeah, no, thank you, Councillor Shawcross, for your flexibility. I understand where you're coming from, Councillor Priest, and obviously I'm not going to make any political comments about recommendations in terms of a budget going forward. Yes, we have got some risks. You know, we've clearly identified, haven't we, in the corporate risk register, that the school's budget situation is a red risk. It is a significant risk. I don't know that I accept your comments, though, that means that actually there are aspects of our provision that are failing, or that we are not meeting our statutory requirements. I do not believe that we are at that point. If I sort of have interpreted what I thought you were saying, if I haven't interpreted it correctly, then I do apologise, because actually I think there is plenty of evidence to demonstrate that although those financial circumstances are extremely challenging, we are still, and our schools are still delivering fundamentally, very high quality services that are meeting the needs of the, the majority of our learners. Yes, we've recognised that there are still some challenges, but I wouldn't want it to be considered that actually we're at a point of failure, because I absolutely do not believe that that is the case. And in terms of the structure of the report, and we welcome your comments around the structure and appreciate it's difficult for you to, but actually we have deliberately written this against the Estin framework. And that the sections of the report reflect the Estin framework, because we are very conscious that Estin could be paying a call to the local authority under that inspection framework anytime soon. And what we know from past experience is Estin are here for a limited time, and it's really important that we put as much information to them, because they will be going through that framework saying, have they answered that question? Have they shown us about that group of learners? So that's why the report actually is set out in the way that it is. But I absolutely take on board your comments sometimes about accessibility and, is it evaluative? Is it, we believe we've tried to be as evaluative as we can be, but it has been produced in a particular way, against that framework. But if I misinterpreted what you're saying, then please do come back to me. But I would want to reassure the committee and anybody watching that education and services, in my view, are not at a point of failure as a result of the, some of the challenges that we are facing.
Chair, can I just come back and say, I meant that we were at the point, if they had a reduction, we would be at that point. So that is the message that I was sending out there, that any reduction to this budget that could be at risk would be definitely at risk if a reduction was made. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Priest. Thank you for that, Claire. Councillor Shawcross, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just going back to the school deficit, it's gone up from 25 to 34. Is there any correlation between these schools and excessive vacant spaces or high deprivation or higher AL? And I know the budgets are tight anyway, but is there anything that we can see that puts anything else into the pot? Thanks.
Are you talking about, are there common themes?
Common themes. I know, because obviously before this there were schools in deficit. Obviously it's going up quite rapidly. Positions within, but are there any, is it just random, or are there any connections with those schools with other issues underlying?
Obviously,
I think we've sort of articulated the majority of the themes, Councillor Shawcross. I think, we talked particularly about pupil demography. So where you're seeing that, it's where, the schools are having to look at their staffing structure to reflect the fact that they've got, significant and sometimes significantly reduced numbers. We would, I can give, we don't talk about individual schools, but heads, are citing examples of where their highest pupil population might have been at one point, significantly reduced now, and we're seeing that in the surplus places as well. So that becomes, I think particularly, across the primary sector. But that will eventually feed its way through to the secondary as well, and it is doing. And I think where we see surplus places, that is particularly challenging then in terms of being able to offer a curriculum and have a staffing structure in place. The complexities are different between primary and secondary. I think some of the themes are there, but how that's worked out practically for schools is very different. And Jeanette's obviously mentioned as well the pressures around ALN and sort of the culture of expectation as well around that. So I don't think there's anything other than that we're picking up. I think where we see recovery plans moving forward quickly at pace and articulated well, that's a clear example as well where governing bodies are very much part of that conversation and really understand the challenges that the head teacher worries about on a day-to-day basis, but it isn't for a head teacher on their own to be able to do that. It is for the governing body to have ownership of that. So I think that's again a key theme of that, the role of the governing body. So when we have the meetings with schools, we invite the chair of governors to attend as well, because it is really important that we get an understanding of where the governing body are in terms of understanding the challenge, understanding the landscape, and understanding the decisions. And they're not easy decisions, but the decisions that the governing body has to take to be able to address some of those issues. And I think just one final point, if I may, Chair, the conversation we have with schools is once you're in a deficit position, it's really hard. It can run away from you. So actually having early decisions and making early changes, as painful as that might be, actually in the long term, it saves more pain, because it is really difficult when you've got, you know, a budget that you are trying to make savings from. How do you then recoup costs that you've already lost? So I'd come back to that comment I made about in-year spend, and then trying to deal with in-year overspend in previous years is difficult to pull back. And that's where we find the most challenging conversations, I have to say. Does that help?
Thank you. Just another quick one as well. The additional learning needs, are we plateauing a little bit with that, or is it still increasing year by year?
We're seeing increase in numbers. We are seeing increase in numbers, and particularly coming into nursery. That's particularly challenging for schools, children coming in non-verbal and having to. And I think that the challenge now is to look at, is that additional learning needs, or is that a developmental delay, or what that process is around those learners. But schools, yes, we're seeing an increase in requests coming to the local authority through our decision-making panel around support for learners. And I think Vicky alluded to before, there is an expectation about a more flexible response from schools by some parents, you know, in response to their child's needs. And I think it's particularly challenging for all schools to be able to respond and put that in place with the resources that they have. So yes, it's not reducing in any way.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor McKeown, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for allowing me right at the end. It was just something I wanted to pick up on Councillor Priest's recommendation around no further cuts to education. I agree, no one on this committee would want to see those cuts. However, and again, last year we all unanimously backed that, and it was ignored by the Cabinet. However, we are facing falling pupil numbers. So is that to say we want to maintain a budget at the same level despite falling pupil numbers, or are you talking about maintaining a budget at almost a cost per pupil level? Because if pupil numbers are falling, it wouldn't be sensible to say we want to retain a budget based on X amount of pupils falling year on year. And that also, just one quick question to Jeanette around ALN. You said that the numbers are increasing. Again, I suppose that's a double pressure. Is it as if numbers overall are decreasing of pupils across the county, but ALN is still increasing in spite of that as well? That's I suppose that's an added pressure, that the numbers are going down and pupils that we're taking in. However, ALN is going up as well. So one graph going down, one going up is creating more pressure for us. So before we kind of get caught out again by anything that Cabinet might do in future around funding, I wanted you to just tighten up that recommendation around where we actually stand on funding, if you could, Councillor Priest, before I agree to it or not.
Sorry, I've actually been amending it as we've been going along, if that's all right. So Kerry, please, if you wouldn't mind reading the recommendation as I suggested.
Thank you. So there's already the recommendation in the report that the Chair wanted to tweak slightly. So I'll read them both out for you. So the first one would read that the committee reviewed and commented on the outcomes of the Education Portfolio's annual self-evaluation report on the quality of education services for the period 2024-25. And B, in view of the key risks related to the delivery of education services as outlined within the report, the committee recommends that there is no reduction within the needed education services budget for 2025-26.
Is that okay?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, does that meet with your approval?
Thank you, Chair. Is that me on? Yeah, thank you, Chair. I do agree with that, because I know where Councillor McEwen's coming from. However, we've got high risk on the actual schools, which they are in red. We are not if we look at the scale, which goes up to scale 5, and we're in a 4 on that position against all of the schools. So we do need to either maintain or to go up. I understand on the numbers decreasing, but the actual provision that we need needs to be maintained not depleted. So we actually need the funding to be there to be able to carry on doing what you're doing, which is a good quality service that you provide. And as Matt kindly said earlier, to expand on areas which is going to support the learners to be able to live fulfilled lives and to be able to carry on in their careers. So I do agree with you with what your recommendation is. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, so do we have a seconder for the? Thank you very much, Councillor Parkhurst. Okay, we'll move straight to that recommendation then. Kerry, please, will you read it again? Just sorry.
So there's the two recommendations, which is that the committee reviewed and commented on the outcome of the Education Portfolio's annual self-evaluation report on the quality of education services for the period 2024-25. And secondly, in view of the key risks related to the delivery of education services as outlined within the report, the committee recommends that there is no reduction within the needed education services budget for 25-26.
Thank you. Can I have some votes? Thank you, Councillor.
26-27, sorry.
Thank you. Sorry. Councillor Breeze, someone to second them, please. Councillor Parkhurst. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Thank you very much. And may I thank you, that's unanimous, and may I thank you all for your company today. And I've enjoyed the conversations very much. I hope you did too. And I thank you for your being here.